So we wanted to see the impact of trimming. So to look at the lateral angles of the hoof first, we had the treatment group and the control group combined, and this is basically to help us to see not only the impact of trimming, but whether the trimming protocol is correct. So both of these groups were combined, and we looked at the pre-trim initial to the pre-trim, post-trim, that stage of the photography, to see if trimming made any statistical difference. And during these measurements, we found that the dorsal hoof wall angle made a highly significant angle improvement. The heel angle also made a highly significant improvement, and the difference between the two, so the difference between the dorsal hoof wall and heel angle, made a highly significant reduction. So the impact of trimming for the soleus surface, for this it was again pre-trim initial to post-trim initial, and we looked at all those individual measurements, width, length, and the gap between the heels, and we also added those measurements together to get one soleus metric. And once we did these, they were put into our data test, and it was discovered that the impact of trimming on the soleus surface made highly significant reductions for all of those measurements and the soleus sum together for both the treatment and the control group.
So in the treatment group, over the 90-day period, you can probably see the top left graph. They look very similar, and they are so similar that we would say that there was no change in the dorsal hoof wall over that period. On the next graph, you can see the heel angle, and even the heel angle, there was a significant increase because they don't overlap, those red bars. So you can see the change, and statistically there was a very significant increase. And then the important measurement that we were talking about, the difference between the dorsal hoof wall angle and the heel angle, again was a highly significant reduction. So in other words, they got close together. Now I've said the dorsal hoof wall really didn't change much, so it was the heel that came to a more similar angle, or moved towards the angle of the dorsal. And you can see that reduction there in that graph. As far as the control group was concerned, again, over the 90-day period, there was not a significant change. So again, the dorsal hoof walls over this period didn't change, or there was an insignificant change. The heel angle was again a non-significant change in our control group. So they remained about the same. The difference between the two as well, so there's the relationship between the heel and the dorsum in this group, in the control group, the group that remained in shoes was non-significant. So we couldn't find a change. So that was consistently across those metrics that we didn't find a change. So the Pearson's correlation test, and here we looked at the age of our young thoroughbreds, or moderately young thoroughbreds, and we wanted to see if there was a relationship between their age in days and the angle of the dorsal hoof wall. Now, the reason we've got those three funny groups is because they're recognising and showing you that thoroughbreds, of course, are bred in a very close group, and those were our 2-, 3- and 4-year-old thoroughbreds. And the line downwards, so the negative correlation, negative does not mean there's anything bad about it. It means that line is going down. So as these thoroughbreds in training were getting older, it was quite measurable that their dorsal hoof wall did descend just a little bit. Not by a huge number of degrees, but it was significant, and it did show up in this test.
So what does the this mean? And all of this data, what does this mean? So the study proved that morphological changes did occur over a period of being unshod, and it is therefore possible to use a period unshod to try and restore hoof angles, and obviously the heel angle in particular, and the difference between a dorsal hoof wall and a heel angle, which is that metric that Kane described as being a serious influence, an indicator of lameness, and it can lead to suspensory apparatus failure. And this could indicate that quite possibly the movement and stimulation of the palm half of the hoof with the sole and the frog and the bars, and obviously the digital cushion, and around the digital cushion where we have these Parsi and corpuscles, these neuroreceptors that are packed in around there. The stimulation of these structures of the foot and the hoof will help the horse to have these changes occur once it has some interaction with the substrate, once we have that ground reaction force. So this is where these changes must occur from. And of course, once we start getting these changes, we get improvements in the function of the hoof.
So I think one of the things that really came out of just looking at these results is that it is the heel angle where Farrier is most effective, not the dorsal hoof wall angle. Now, I think possibly one of the things that has affected our results is that Gavin shod these horses, and clearly, you know, he is an extremely accomplished farrier, and he'd been shoeing them for at least 6 months, and some of them for a couple of years. So he'd probably achieved as much with the dorsal hoof wall angle as he was going to get. And I think if we had done a study where we had brought horses in that had been neglected and they'd gone 10 weeks without shoeing, we might have had something different. But these were well maintained, shod every month, and it was very interesting to see that this study showed that although it showed an immediate improvement by trimming, there was then a decline through the period, just through the period of a month. So we have to remember, and I think one of the messages from this study is that heel angle is where farrier is most effective, not at the dorsum. And I'd have to say a lot of people have probably been looking at the wrong place. So that's the first sort of take home from this study.
So as for the control group, we saw that there was no significant changes amongst any of the lateral measurements, the dorsal hoof wall, the heel angle, or the difference between the two. And this could be due to inadequate frog support through maybe the fitting of the peripheral fitting of a shoe, obviously having an open heel shoe, and the palm half of the foot, the frog, and the sole not being able to get that contact with the substrate, which obviously is reducing some of the functionality of the hoof there. And this actually supports previous studies. As I said, that when you're doing your fellowship, it's all about literature study and standing on the shoulder giants, as other people have said here over the last couple of days. And some of these studies that I had to look into suggested some of the same things there. So it supports some previous studies when we're talking about displacement of the palmar half of the hoof.
So, what recommendations come out of this study from us? One of them is to reduce the shoeing cycle, and of course that already racehorses in training have a short shoeing cycle. These are normally a month, but nevertheless, we feel that because it clearly shows that you get a good improvement with your trim and shoeing if you're a competent farrier, but that declines over the period of the month, and potentially if it was shortened by a week, there'd be less decline, and therefore we would keep on top of the shape. Difficult one, firstly to get over to the owners and the trainers, and secondly, you know, thoroughbreds are not renowned for their strong hooves, and actually increasing the number of times they're shod over a year is potentially going to make more work for ourselves. But also, don't come on, it's like when you used to push me to get on and shoe the horse quicker. So, reducing the shoeing cycle is important, but also having periods unshod. And I have to say, over the years, and especially years before, in the UK, we only had racing as thoroughbreds from March until November. And they had periods where they went home and they had the shoes off and they were turned out. And of course, we're not just, we're trying to say what does this mean to other types of horses, because the low-heeled horses, those are thoroughbreds renowned for it, it's not just thoroughbreds that suffer from this. So it would seem to us to recommend periods of unshod, whether that's 3 months in a year, whether it's 3 months every couple of years, but we've clearly shown that that is very, very beneficial to hoof shape.
So along this course of this study, we actually were able to use the data to look at some other things we didn't initially plan to look at from all the data that was available to us. So we were able to look at the relationship of underarm heels, the angle of underarm heels, and we may be able to redefine what some of these established angular differences are that we have at the moment that describe underarm heels. If you check a lot of literature, you will find that they say a difference between a 5-degree difference from the dorsal hoof wall angle to the heel angle can be representative of underarm heels. And in other studies, you'll find that maybe up to 15 degrees is a description of underarm heels. We found in our study that the mean average of angular difference between the heel and the dorsal hoof wall angle was actually 21.86 degrees, which is a lot higher than any of those previous measurements there. So this could lead to maybe we need a higher baseline indicator of what actually is underarm heels in thoroughbred horses.